All right. Well, welcome to Bold Strong. This is the Bold Strong podcast, and I'm Craig Nadeau, and I'm super excited today to have Mimi Nguyen with us. And Mimi is a lecturer. She's working on her PhD. I think you're working on it, and done some amazing research and created some great information for us regarding working from home, which is really such a fascinating topic in our world right now, and it's really coming to a head right now. So welcome, Mimi. Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, and thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Looking
So
forward to
maybe,
that.
yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about some of the research you're doing. That is super exciting to me.
So I've joined Imperial College London mainly to look into multidisciplinary collaboration. So that's how we started. And kind of like a year into the research, of course, we found out just from looking at the literature, basically, that there is a gap there, not really much in terms of creative remote working. And after a year, we decided to do some more studies looking into creative teams. So we're trying to see how multidisciplinary teams, so people coming from different backgrounds, like engineers, designers, architects, product people, and even like the business side, can work together on innovative or creative projects in a remote setting. So the study actually kicked off, I think, in 2019, and we had to go for a lot of paperwork with ethical kind of approval, and then COVID happened. So it was kind of like a natural experiment environment for me, setting that just fell in my lap in a fortunate way. Talk to people and discuss about remote working in their personal, private environments. Normally, if we do a research, I would have to go to the office or meet outside in a cafe, but still next to an office, and we'll talk about like how do you work in your team, which I think would make the study slightly different, because there is the fear that there's someone in the company passing by, or your boss, and then you don't want to really be honest. Whereas in the lockdown, everyone was talking to me from their bedrooms, basically, and there were a lot of frustrations, a lot of interesting information that I learned from these teams. And yeah, I mean, I'm following the participants, and it kind of opens up a lot of new research avenues. So it changed a lot now into organizational identification. That's some unexpected result in finding that we saw from the data. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next part of the research, which will be more into identity as an employee, or like how do you identify yourself with an organization, and how it leads to employee retention mainly. So I think it's quite it kind of lifted this part. So it's just interesting to see like how the research evolved from just starting into multidisciplinary collaboration, looking at the creatives, into something broader within the topics of future of work. And now it leads slowly into organizational behavior, and I'm very excited for that.
Right. And you looked a little bit at like corporate culture and maintaining corporate culture within the environment. And that would have been really interesting as well, because that's part of organizational behavior, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is something that came out from the interviews. I was more, again, focused first on the tools. So what tools are people using? Is it Slack, email, video conferencing? How do they behave? And then, of course, we identified a lot of issues that are related to this remote working. Of course, the biggest one is it's very hard for creative projects to take place in a virtual space. I know we have a lot of mural boards, so kind of virtual post-its, but the flow of information, of course, and the discussions are different just purely because of the technicalities. So I think even on the podcast now when we're speaking, right, it's like either once you're speaking, you're being put on a spotlight and you have to say something, and then it's like over to me, I'm saying something. Whereas if we would be in the room, we possibly would overtalk each other, and that's when this creative force could come out, and then you have a lot of serendipitous conversations.
Right, you're right, because like a podcast in some ways, like this is a bit of an act. We're kind of acting right now, right?
Yeah, it is. But that's my point. I think we're all acting at video conferencing meetings, because you're having like kind of the mic now, and you have to say, so you can't really say something stupid. But then sometimes something stupid can become the most crazy idea that becomes an innovation. So that's one of the things that I noticed about remote working and video conferencing. Another big issue was engagement, of course. So in bigger groups, in bigger meetings, it's so easy, and I can see that as an educator, as someone who had to teach online. Sometimes I have students that are just disappearing. I don't even know what they're doing. So the camera's off. They'll possibly be eating lunch in the same time, or even like cooking. And the engagement is very low. And then some of my participants did say that, there is a meeting and they, in the same time, just having Outlook open and replying to emails. So it's a waste of everyone's time in a way that it's not really efficient, because if there's no engagement, there's no input, it's hard then to really talk about good teamwork here. And I think what people miss mostly is this serendipity that happens at I know it sounds cheesy, but at the coffee machine, at the little walks from room to room. That's when I personally learned a lot. Like, I got inspired with something I never heard about, and then someone just literally mentioned a project that they're doing that is not related to work. And I think talking not about work helps a lot in creative process. Just thinking about anything around. And then I think the engagement issue is one of the key aspects that affects employee retention and employee identification.
Did you look at all at the component of leadership and like leadership development? Did that fall into it at all?
There was a part in the study when I did look into teams with leadership and without leadership. And I think from literature, what we of course learn is that, it depends what is our metric. What do we count here as the success metric? So it could be either performance, which is kind of the main body of research. It could be efficiency, so optimization of timing and how to make things faster. It could be effectiveness, so having kind of like the impact. And I think we tend to not talk about creativity because it's something that you cannot really measure. So there's not much. There is some, and of course the research that is about creativity is that it requires a bit of flexibility. So it is kind of autonomous leadership happening here. It's like a bit of a dance performance when people are learning from each other. And really, I think creatives needs to have less structure than more to thrive in the creative environment. So I think in terms of the leadership, if I would go into an organization that is more structured, that has more like clear values, and in terms of the meetings, even for the meetings, having memos, having meeting notes, that makes the meeting more effective, but I'm not sure it would make it more creative.
That's interesting. Wow. So when you looked at it, you step back from the research, and was it a scheme of this type of work can be successful in a hybrid or even a fully work from home environment, but this work absolutely can't? And was there could we start to identify roles that maybe need to be on the far right and others that need to be on the far left?
That's something I tried to maybe say in the article, but if I look back now, I don't think it was a good idea. I don't think we should have any rules with anything that comes with human beings, because of course now we're entering a space of diversity in terms of gender, in terms of cultural differences and personality. So I think there are types of course, employees more creative that would be in favor more in terms of this flexible thing, but there are types of work that you don't really need to be that flexible, and you can just possibly work from 9 to 5, complete your tasks. And that there's a whole discussion with coders, right? Like, should coders even show up in the office? And then architects, I do believe that architects, I think they thrive better in office. And I think in that cases, when I spoke to participants, in between lockdowns, are you guys back now to the office? They're like, of course we're back, because that's something we really needed, kind of having physical pictures and inspiration and talking to other people. In terms of coders, a lot of participants who were more engaged on the engineering side, they for them it's not like something new. They used to work remotely anyway, so they used to work from other countries. They didn't have structured hours, but I think it's a personal take in terms of how to really accommodate this environment, the work environment. The only thing that could harm in terms of accommodating to individual needs is actually the team cognition, because if everyone wants to work remotely, or at least half of the team wants to work remotely, then suddenly we're entering the hybrid meetings, which I don't know, personally for me, they're a bit quite, there's a nightmare. And I can just literally share it from my personal experience when we are teaching and delivering classes in a hybrid mode. So I have 20 students, let's say, on site, and then 20 students online on a Teams meeting. And I mean, simple as this, when we have a lecture, I do have questions and more involvement, engagement from the students on site. And then there's always this moment when we look back at this projection and we say, is there any question from the online guys? And like, there's zero.
Zero, yeah, I know.
There's like zero questions. Like, have you even listened to the lecture?
That's right.
Or like literally, and then I asked them once, I was very sharp, like, can you please put your cameras on? Because I really want to know that you are actually in the lecture, because otherwise this is not working. And I think that kind of also discusses the issue of inclusion, because, does it then, if you have half of the team on site and say they would be perceived by managers as the ones that perform better because they're more engaged, because they're giving more input into the project. And then you have the person who, due to any reasons, let's say childcare, has to stay home and is joining online, then, would that be very fair when we're assessing the employees? Because someone was online doesn't mean that they performing worse. It's just that the access to the conversation and discussion was worse just from a technological point of view. So I think it touches on the issue of inclusion a lot as well.
It's interesting too, like, and as a lecturer, you would probably see this. It's harder to, I feel anyways, when you're on a Zoom meeting, to kind of read the audience, to kind of get a feel for, like, it's their engagement really, but you can see them smiling, but you can't see their body posture necessarily, and some of the other cues that we all give off. That's really tough, I find, in meetings. Sometimes,
I mean, one of my first classes during the lockdown, I literally thought that I'm speaking to myself, because everyone was muted. It helps for the call, right? Yes. Because there's some noises around. And then I was like, I'm literally delivering a lecture for 1 hour, just talking clearly to myself. I'm making jokes that I'm laughing by myself. Like, there's like no reaction.
Oh my goodness.
It was very painful.
Yeah. Wow. Do you feel that like a lot of, and it's kind of in what you're saying too, is it, I think at the beginning of COVID, like COVID kind of forced us to be away from the office. We didn't have a choice. So it was being driven, we could point the finger at the government even and go that far and say it was the government / our employers enacted it. But then I think what we're seeing now is as we're coming out the other end of COVID, is that employees are saying, I want this, and it's not being driven by the employer. So I'm curious where the employers are now. Are the employers saying, we want people back, or are people saying enough's enough, I want to come back? Or like, what's the mix of where the motivation is coming from to be either in or to stay out of the workplace?
I completely agree about the source of the force now. Yeah, it was enforced from let's say the regulations, and then now it's something that is from inside kind of organizations. People are raising these voices. It's interesting to observe this, is because I do believe that employers want employees to be in the office, because they believe in the learning process. So if you have junior employees, they learn from senior employees, and they want to be surrounded by them. It's clearly sometimes you can hear a conversation next to you, or on someone in the desk next to you, and you can just like little tweaks, like maybe next time say this, or like you can learn like how they greet a client on the phone, and then you can just kind of quickly upskill yourself, or learn, train. So that the training and the learning process is actually way better in person.
Mm-hmm.
And I think junior employees do want to come into the office because that's when they meet friends as well. They have
Right.
a life in the city. They can go out afterwards. So I do notice that the call for home working, it's more from the managers, from the senior employees who I can afford to have an office at home.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they're talking to me from like the special attics or
Yeah.
office rooms that are very nice.
Yeah.
And they don't really care about learning, right? Because they just want things to be done. And of course, it's
Right.
faster on a call, on an email. And then they usually would live maybe further in the city, with like bigger houses. So the commuting time, of course,
Mm-hmm.
plays a big role here. And I start to personally also see like how nice is it not to commute? Like I'm
Right.
saving a lot of time.
How bad is your
But
commute? Like if you have to commute into the
God,
university, or like how bad is that for you?
if to one of the university, it can be 50 minutes one
So
way.
close to an
So
hour.
it's,
Wow.
yeah, it's and
That's
one
a long time.
hour one way. So
Yeah.
actually, so by the time I get home, it's 7
Mm.
and it's dark. No, now it's not dark anymore, but you
Yeah.
know, you have to cook dinner and then look at
Right.
and then do all this bedtime things with my daughter. So the kind of the day is gone. But if I
Yeah.
am at home, I have extra 2 hours, which I can, I don't know, maybe relax. So I do understand both sides,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that if our aim is something higher than just, you know, being optimized, being really delivering things on time and deadlines, but it's as a senior employee, let's say as a manager, as a partner, you want to um, pass on this tacit knowledge, right? The thing that
Yeah.
you've learned over the last 20 years. And then it would be great to just share it with junior employees.
Mm.
I don't think it's being done online. It's being done by just being in an office with someone. So yeah, I think companies has to have this quite clear
Mm-hmm.
um, set of values now. Like, what is the thing that we want now? Do we want this? Um, do we focus more on teamwork? Do we focus on knowledge exchange, or do we focus on effectiveness?
Right. Yeah, I
It
think a
depends
lot
on the
of
industry.
yeah, it seems like a lot of the online meetings kind of have devolved into bullet points. And you know, we have half an hour, we're gonna hit the bullet points. We're not gonna think or like expand or use good brainstorming techniques, right? Because that's a technique. So yeah, it seems like we've
Again,
lost some of that.
there are both sides with online meetings. One side is that it becomes bullet points, so it becomes very okay. Let's just talk about it. So, like in my research, I call it task-related knowledge. So there are
Okay.
like 4 pillars of shared cognition. You have task-specific knowledge, which usually would use Jira for that, or maybe Google Drive commenting on the
Okay.
file. So it's very like specific. And then you have task-related knowledge, which is anything around the project,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of video conferencing when you can kind of discuss issues related to the project. And then there is this big part, team knowledge, which is understanding your teammates. And this usually is used through informal, casual communication channels like Slack, let's say, or
Right.
WhatsApp groups. And then, of course, there's this one big blog that I am focusing mainly on. It's called Attitudes and Beliefs. And this is something that I see an issue in remote working, because we can't really, as you say, guess someone's mood through the online thing. Like, you don't really, I can see from my face whether I had a good day or
Yeah.
bad day. And then my beliefs kind of, because the beliefs come out from this random conversation at the water
Right.
cooler, and engagement. So I think this
Mm-hmm.
is the soft part that is missing here. But in terms of like sorting out, as you say, bullet points, task-related knowledge, video conferencing is perfect for that. The only issue also on the other side of that is sometimes these calls during the lockdown became too long.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because then you have to book it into someone's calendar, and suddenly
Right.
you have to sit there for 1 hour talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Whereas normally, if we would be in the office, I could just pop by your desk,
Yeah.
say, and it would literally take me 5 minutes.
Right.
So it's both efficiency and inefficiency. It's kind of like very interesting to see, like, how do we really learn to use meetings now in a good
Mm-hmm.
way? So if there's something important, something creative, let's meet in person, even like out in a town, like in a cafe or something. But if we're really trying to sort something quickly out, let's just have a 15-minute call. There's no
Sure.
point of sitting there for 1 hour.
Yeah. Yeah. You caused me to think Elon Musk, I don't know if he recently said it or if I only just saw it recently, but he said that his policy in his company is if you're in a meeting and either you can't add value to it or it's not adding value to you, you get up and go. And you're expected to get up and go. That's kind of an interesting.
I like it.
Yeah, I had.
Yes, but then you can't learn. Then you don't get inspired.
Yeah, I think it's dramatic is why he's doing it. He's saying that to be dramatic, but you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've also had. I've had people in Zoom meetings where I've wondered if their camera's off. Like it's on and I can see them, but they haven't moved in 10 minutes. But I think they're just sitting there like this the whole time. It's terrible.
Yes. Maybe they're watching Netflix. I don't know.
Yeah, could be on the other side of the screen.
Yeah, the next window. I mean, that's completely possible. But again, with Elon Musk, for example, it's slightly different for companies like Tesla or Amazon to have harsh rules, like let's say you have to be in the office, because the brand of the company is so big that I don't think, if someone would leave the company, if someone works for Tesla, I'm leaving Tesla because they don't let me work remotely, then that's kind of the personal choice. But I think for smaller SME companies, that's the issue, because they have to kind of strike a balance here, because it's more sensitive in terms of employee retention, and you can't really be harsh. So that's why you're saying, now what is the situation of employers? I think they are in big problem, literally having to accommodate employees' needs in terms of, we want hybrid working, we want remote working. But then on the other hand, they do want to have people in person. So how do you communicate that? It's a tricky situation. So I think we'll sort out in the future. So, I mean, for example, Goldman Sachs and lawyers, I don't think there is an issue if they say everyone is in the office now.
Yeah.
I know my colleague is in a private equity company, and then I was like, everyone's in 5 days a week. That's it. Like, your choice. You can either leave the company, feel free, but people won't leave because they're earning so much money.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the tricky situation is for SMEs when you're still fighting for this, war of talent and stuff. So to keep the employee. But yeah, with the hybrid working, I mean, we're testing that with my company as well. And so far it's working, but let's see. My only concern with all this movement and this change of behavior is I had a situation when someone didn't show up to the office, and I was like, I thought that you're in today. I'm like, no, I have a appointment with a medical appointment. And then it hit me that in my days when I was working in big organizations, if I had a medical appointment, I would take half a day off.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Officially, I would write an email to HR. I was like, I need to take half a day off because I'm going. But nowadays, because you have a delivery scheduled from Amazon, or if you have an appointment, then you just decide to sit at home without even noticing the employer. And this is shocking, because I think there needs to be a communication here, at least the structure of what days you are in the office and what days you're not.
I have seen some companies, some people that I know who they have been working remote, and they've also, their company has implemented tools, I guess, or applications that track their hours online, where they know that the person's touching their computer.
Oh God.
And, and if you are not touching it over a half-hour period, they know you're not working.
That's terrible.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think they're being very draconian. They're trying to, we want our money's worth, I guess, is the way they're approaching it. So,
I think that's terrible. I had a big debate recently about the 4-day work week, because a lot of countries are implementing that. And I think there's a quite good response. And I personally think that it's not a good approach in terms of, I personally prefer to work 6-7 days, but less hours in the day. It's just as long as I finish my things, as long as I deliver, that's fine. But squeezing 36 hours into 4 days just doesn't make sense to me, because it makes the day longer. It makes more Zoom calls in one day. And then with the commuting and the lunch break, it suddenly becomes a 12-hour work day. And I don't really know how these people, who is picking up the kids in that 4 days. Suddenly I have to pay for a nanny to pick up my daughter because I have to stay at work till 7. So I think that I think people are missing the point here. It's not about hours really, clocking off. I mean, we're talking about a specific type of work here, right? Like professional service usually, which a lot of things are happening also in your head outside. Like it's not just about clicking on the keyboard, right? It's also a lot of things that are happening on the calls, in the meetings. How can you track that? So I think just saying that we're going to have 36 hours within 4 days, it's going to lead way more to burnout, and people at the third day, they would just collapse, I think. So I think it's quite an interesting experiment. And I do believe that it's more, the development world is moving towards agile and all this Scrum way of working, when you have like the stand up every Monday. And I think this is way better. So this is, you have a week to do whatever you want to do. Do it on Sunday evening if, this is when you have some silence from your children. But then on Monday morning, let's update each other, like, what is the progress of the project. But yeah, I think the 4 days, it's very risky in terms of burnout.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I get worried about in the workforce is that if everyone's saying I want to work from home, and I never need to come to the office, I can do my job entirely from home. And then at some levels, they start to be commoditized, and they're, the product of what you do could be done by anybody. And this takes out of it, the whole creativity component. But if you peel that creativity component out and you say, I can measure how many button pushes I do or how many lines of code I generate, well, then you're at some level of risk where it doesn't have to be you anymore. It could be someone who's incredibly inexpensive, who's prepared to do it for a third or a quarter or a tenth of what you make. So I think there's some risk there to people, and I think they need to be fairly cognizant that you do risk commoditizing yourself and pricing yourself out. You're expensive.
Yeah, people. I saw one comment in Financial Times during the lockdown, and I think it was exactly on the same point, because a lot of employees are saying, I can work from home now. It's great, because actually there was this massive movement of a lot of people earning, American or let's say UK money, and then going to cheaper countries to live, because now I can, just zoom in from Lisbon. So I'm literally like earning 3 times more than the local group. But then, exactly as you say, like if you can prove that your job can be done remotely, why don't I hire someone in Asia?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
like, what do you bring to the table? That's the question, right? Like, what do you bring?
If you can do exactly the same thing in Lisbon, I'm just going to hire someone in Lisbon with less money. And of course, there are a lot of organizations that are supporting companies to do that with like all the paperwork. So I completely agree. I think that from the employee point of view, this is the risk that you just proved, that you are exchangeable. But also, talking to my participants, they realize that. So one of the person worked in a very renowned company, and what he shared with me is that he just realized that the reason why he came to that company was because of people, was because of all the other impressive people that he could hang out with and basically learn from. So like all of this, heroes that he dreamt of before in his industry. And because of this remote working, again, like this is now we're turning into workers, right? That are just doing our tasks that has to be delivered on a particular deadline. And he realized that he could do this for anyone else. It doesn't matter which company is that. And then as a result, he actually did resign. So I think it leads to this question that it shows us like, we're not attached to any company. I mean, some of the people, I guess, are in companies because of the team, because of people that are surrounding. And if suddenly this is taken away from us, it doesn't really matter which company we work for.
Right. Yeah.
So then we choose the one that is easier, right? The one that, give us less pressure. And so I think that's why this whole great resignation and stuff, because we took away one of the elements of work, the social one, that I think everyone forgot about, that work is not just about work it's also just about people that are around you and you can learn from.
Right. You make a really, really interesting point in that I think, let's say we went back even 20 years, when people were looking at a company that they were going to go to, they evaluated it by maybe they would say, how close is it to my house would be one thing. And then they would say, how much am I getting paid? And, is this the type of work I want to do? And then they would immediately, the very next thing is like culture. What's the company culture like? And it was like a question everybody asks. And now maybe like what you're saying is maybe that company culture got peeled out and now people are negotiating on, well, how many hours do I actually have to be in the office? And, it's like, whoa, that's totally different dynamic to negotiate on now. That's interesting.
I agree. This is one of the main question now, right? Like, is it 2 days? Is it 3 days I have to be in the office? Kind of like it turns work into something that we just have to tick off. I'm not a fan of that because that clearly means that you don't really care about your job. You're just doing that just to pay off your mortgage. It's quite depressive as well. And I think from my career also, I ended up sometimes randomly in weird industries. So like I was in consulting, but my specialty was at that time insurance. And it's because I followed my at that time boss, and we had an amazing team, and we just kept getting more projects in insurance. And I was like, okay, I know it doesn't sound as sexy as banking, but I just really like the people that I'm sitting every single day. There's a lot of hours you're spending in consulting with these guys. So if I have to sit till 11 with someone, I'd rather like enjoy this this room. And and it was just, every project was super fun because I liked people in my team. I really respected my boss. And it wasn't a fancy name. And I think it's a lot of like jobs, organizations, like, we hear about Big Four or like Big Three. I do think that sometimes rejections, let's say, from interviews, it's not that you were not the best candidate, but you didn't fit the culture or the team. And I think big companies are dealing quite well with that. They have like really good screening system for the cultural fit. And sometimes I see my friends who are, let's say, in 10 years in Big Four, and I'm like, you are exactly the person who thrive in this environment. Like you love this, the structure here, and I kind of then understand now that it's more actually your career. It's more about culture than actually the name that you get on your CV.
Right. Yeah. I think when I'm a sociology guy from university. And so I look at people and the way they interact. And I think one of the trends, and I'm really curious to see it 20 years from now. And I think, to be like, it's really a broad strokes really, but you go back in time, X period of time. And I think people just went to work because they needed to make money, and you went to work, you did your job, you went home, and that was your friends. That was, you went to your church, you went to your bowling league or whatever, and that was your circle of friends. And I think there's been a big shift where people come to work and now they're with their friends. This is their friend group. And so when you terminate someone from their friend group, it's like you're getting a divorce. So you're like saying, you can't be friends with us anymore. So now I'm curious, now that we've got this work from home environment where people are intentionally, in many cases, self-isolating, where are your friends now? Like, are these online Zoom meeting friends we have that we'll never meet in person? So I'm really curious what what's going to happen 20 years or 30 years from now when we've had these kind of odd relationships online with people that we may never meet. It's going to be interesting.
I think, you're touching on a very important point, this isolation. I had a lot of people who left the country, exactly as you say, because their circle of friends were a lot of people from the office. And the moment this was taken away, they realized that what's the point of actually being here? Because, we're not going out anymore. We're just, clicking on emails at home. And they decided to leave the country completely. They were like, okay, let's start somewhere fresh, new. Our group of friends are kind of gone. A lot of people resigned.
Yeah, sure.
So it's kind of like a very interesting shift in how do we value our personal relationships with work. And I do agree from a sociological point of view, it's quite disturbing to see that suddenly we're losing growth. And it's also because we're not belonging to any specific community. And then it's just a shift from the religious kind of, right? Because you used to like every Sunday go to your church and then have your friends there. And nowadays, I don't know, you can have your Sunday pub friends, but they're all dispersed. And I think that that makes it even less binding to any organization for us. Because if we work remotely, then
and I would really agree. It really does tie back to this whole sense of creativity, really, that you've been talking about. And it's like, how do you be creative when you're not around people? You're completely isolated. And you know, you look back from a social anthropological level, like the whole concept of inventions spreads around the world because we're interacting, not because we're completely isolated. And you see cultures that are completely isolated, and their level of ingenuity and invention is very stagnated compared to groups that, you know, they got in a boat and just floated around and suddenly they're spreading information around the world. And that's, you know, if we're isolated, that starts to be gone really quickly.
It taps into the next steps after creativity. So I you know, there's a whole this debate about, is creativity something that comes from a group or comes from an individual mind? And again, I think that this is an ongoing debate. It's quite hard for me to really like find, like, you know, like you find this inventor. Of course, if you ask him like, where did you get this inspiration for, it could possibly be that he talked to someone or he saw something from a social interaction. But let's say this is an individual work. Let's say, like, you know, if someone can prove that, that's fine. The next step is implementation of this creativity, of this creative idea, and the implementation suddenly involves other people. Like, I don't, like, any innovations, I always say that are a work of many. It's a team behind anything that is being pushed up into innovation and basically adaptation of this innovation. So I think that if we then, okay, we got the idea, we got this genius inventor, now let's apply it to reality, let's implement that, and then we have like people entering the project. And this is when you can't really be isolated. You can't really do by yourself anything. Set up a company and then just, like, you know, run by yourself. It's still, you need help people.
It's just your job.
So
it's not a company anymore.
So I do think that so it's not just about creativity, it's about innovation as well. So if you want to, like, if we want to ever improve things and improve our lives, so kind of bringing that into practice, teamwork is essential. And I think in a remote setting, it's quite risky.
So when we look at what you've been working on, what's the takeaways now? Like, you know, when you look, you maybe had an idea at the beginning, your big hypothesis, and now you're looking at it differently. What's your takeaway at this point?
Right now, what's most interesting for me is this retention. Kind of a lot of my participants, let's say half of them left the companies. So my plan is to go back to speak to them and really understand the reason why they left these organizations. And I think that could inform me quite a lot in terms of what is missing in this organizational culture in order to build a good, not even brand, but a good kind of team environment for people to not only thrive but to stay in the company. So I think the study that just started simply from looking at multidisciplinary collaboration is turning into something more psychological. And that's something that is the most exciting part for me, to really dig into the reasons why people left the companies during this remote working phase.
That'll be interesting. So is that like the next step in the study, is like
to look at the that's the next step. I have to I had a lot of teaching recently, but like once it kind of like slows down, I can go back, because I had so many participants. I had to like book all the interviews with them. I mean, ideally it would be nice to meet them, because again, like all these interviews were via Zoom. And trying to find out, because again, a new debate is like, is that really a great resignation or is it just great relocation, right? So like, are they just like, is it good that actually they left because now they found their calling and they found, like, you know, a better job that suits they really thought about you know, their career, and then they changed professions. I do sense sometimes, and recently, like, I have like casual chats with participants when like we were trying to book like a proper interview. What I noticed is that some of these relocation jobs, when we took on during COVID, they're not lasting.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah.
because the interviews to these jobs were online. And you know, it's different when you're doing the interviews or assessment centered online, and you find that okay, this person is a great addition to your team, and then you meet the person in,
Yeah.
you know, in real life. It's like, oh my god, like this is just clashing.
Yeah.
So I guess that, you know, there are points that people are suddenly finding the call and changing to a better job, but I don't think it's true. I believe that this creates even a higher turnover. It's
Right.
just like a testing phase. And to be honest, for economy, it's very bad because,
Yeah.
you know, losing an employee costs around £30,000 because
Right.
of all the training
Yeah.
and then hiring a new person. And it's also like for us as people, it's draining process because you're entering a new culture, you're entering a new environment that you actually have to part later with. So yeah, I think it will affect well-being a lot. Kind of, you know, constant search, and I do think that we kind of jumped on that too quickly. So we're like, okay, I'm isolated now, let's just leave this.
Sure.
I'm done with this, let's go to a new job. And then, you know, what the reality hits you, and like, actually I don't really
Yeah.
like the new job. I
Yeah.
have to find a new one.
Yeah.
It's such a draining process.
It's interesting because it goes back to your point about, you know, that person's connection to the business and the connection to something, you know, and then it would be interesting to see us. It probably wouldn't be complicated to pull up the data and say, what is the average length of time that someone is employed at any one employer, and maybe look at that over a, you know, a 100-year time span. You know, that would be interesting to see how that's evolved.
But maybe we will change the way we work in general. You could see that the trend is, you know, from the previous generation, people would stay 10 years in a specific organization, whereas nowadays, and I'm not criticizing because I'm doing that myself, unfortunately, if you go for my career, like I used to change jobs every 2 years. That's kind of like my max that I could last. I'm not saying that this is something good. And then I'm a product of my generation of all the formal, you know, effects and stuff. And if I look back, I think that, you know, it would be great for me to also experience being 10 years in an organization, right? Because
absolutely.
you want to be, you know, learn and expert. But then on the other hand, you're not having all this multidisciplinary experience. So again, I think that, you know, the threshold, the limit that a person can last gets shorter and shorter now, because we're getting less attached to our work, or we just realize that work is not that important in life anymore. It's again thing like this generation that comes out from war. Work is very important because you have to pay your mortgage. I mean, you saw the war. My parents saw the Vietnamese war, so, you know, for them it's like, oh my god, we have this house, we have to work hard to keep it, right? Whereas my generation, I mean, if I resign from this job, I still have the house. What is the issue here? So that suddenly I do hear a lot of voices that people just really don't need the work anymore. So that's why we're being so picky and we're changing so often. A new thing that I might be digging into is like, what is it a project-based work? Like, you know, the whole rise of gig economy. So we're not really being attached to one organization, but we're just doing like 3 months of projects. It's a bit like consulting as well, but we are not belonging to a particular culture. Again, this is good maybe for some people in terms of well-being, but there's an amazing study by Gianpiero Petrigelli from INSEAD about gig economy, and he's showing two sides of that, because you are being more in control of who you work with, what projects, you know, excites you, which one you want to join, and, you know, it just lasts 3 months, so you're off. Even if you hate the team, you're like, okay, I'm off. But it gives you lack of stability. So you're constantly stressed, like, when is the next project? And I think that kind of was visible during lockdown, when companies were saving costs a lot, and they just basically let their freelancers off. And these people who, the moment you actually have a mortgage and then your project base, you are at risk of having a cash flow on a monthly basis. So I think both sides, but I do see the trend moving towards project-based work. Let's see how it ends up.
Yeah, it's interesting that the gig environment is, there's companies that are building massive strategies around it to manage it. But and it's part of what you're saying is that it simply is commoditizing what you can do. It's not your creative capacities, or it's only what you can do. And if you're $1 more expensive than the guy in the next box,
Yeah.
you just click the other box. So it's interesting, and it makes you really have to compete.
I think we haven't talked about the most also important issue is trust in teams, because project-based work doesn't give you enough time to build trust with your collaborator. Yeah. It's very difficult, and especially if it's remote, that's even harder.
Yeah.
So as you say, it's commoditizing, but also kind of using you just as a worker, not as you're becoming a worker, not a team member. And I think spending your valuable time in an organization, in person, in office, kind of allows you at least to try to build trust with your colleague. And you know, this is basically from research, people with ties in organizations are more have higher probability to push for innovative projects. So how it looks like is that if we have close ties, and the study shows that people with a lot of loose ties, actually, so connections with other departments. So this is basically people that you bumped into canteen, outside when you smoke, loose ties, so not really your close colleagues. When you are coming up with something creative, something innovative, and then you want to push it through, this organizational layers, it's easier to have, of course, contacts in other departments that would support you in that. So if we don't have this, random relationships that has been built over years through serendipitous moments, leader trust, then I think it really will harm and affect innovativeness of any organization.
Yeah, I think there's a book, I can't remember I know it was called The Speed of Trust, and I can't remember who wrote it or how old it was, but it's talking about exactly that.
I'll check that, but I think this is a massive issue that we're not talking, because again, we keep talking about performance and efficiency, but there are other sides of that. There's, in order to have any success in work, I guess trust and then good team relationships is important for companies. So it would be good to just look in 5 years, compare companies that went completely remote and with freelancers, companies who kind of stuck to in-person office work, and the employees that stayed there, and then really see like how this will pan out.
That would be a really interesting, there's going to be some amazing research to come up out of this. So it's going to be great. So, well, listen, I respect your time, and I know you got to run off to some other stuff, Mimi, and what a pleasure. I hope we can stay in touch, because like what you're studying is so up our alley, and like it's so pivotal right now to employers. It's really, and to the employee, of course, too. So it's going to be some great information. So, and you're doing a podcast too, I believe. Are you doing that sometimes?
Yeah, we do. We had a break, but we're starting over the next few weeks. We're starting a new series, but it's more about leadership. It's called Searching for Mana. And there will be some exciting news. So you'll see in a few weeks. We're announcing a partnership. So that's something
awesome.
I'm looking forward to.
We can link up to that. Yeah, we'll link up to your all of your stuff to the the description and stuff on the podcast. So, well, thanks very much for your time, Mimi. I really appreciate some amazing work. Love it. And hopefully we can talk again before too long. So this was great. So,
thanks for having me.
Great. Okay. Thanks for your time, Mimi. We'll talk again.
All right.
Bye for now. Hey, this is Craig. Thanks for watching this episode. I have a number of really interesting people that I'm going to be speaking with over the next while. Don't miss an episode. They're going to be great. If you have a chance, jump over to the partnerstaffing.com website. All the links to the videos that we're doing that are employment related will be there. Anyways, hit subscribe. Special thanks to our editor, Chris Filosovich. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Craig out.